Welcome to the Page 2 podcast, where we uncover the strategies, systems, and tactical decisions that move brands beyond Page 2 and into real visibility across search and answer engines. Today, Joe and I are talking with Alex Moss, Principal SEO at Yoast and co-founder of FireCask. Alex has spent more than 2 decades working across SEO, WordPress, structured data, product development, and the messy technical decisions that shape how millions of websites actually work. And because Yoast sits inside so many WordPress sites, even small product choices, what gets turned on by default, what gets hidden behind an API, what gets made easy or intentionally harder, can ripple across the web. The real story here is that SEO is entering a much more complex phase. It's not just about rankings or blue links anymore. It's about whether your content is structured clearly enough for a model to understand, whether your site has a reliable source of truth, and whether potential future standards like llms.txt, markdown endpoints, entity maps, and agentic commerce protocols actually become part of how discovery works. Alex makes a really useful distinction in this conversation. Just because the technology is ready does not mean people are ready. He talks about why buying bananas through ChatGPT probably is not the breakthrough use case for agentic commerce, why Shopify may be moving faster than WordPress on some of these standards, and why brands need to think less about manipulating systems and more about being selected by them. What I liked about this conversation is that Alex is both excited and skeptical. He sees where this is going, but he is not selling a magic playbook. His advice is much more practical. Experiment. Stay close to the engineers building the future. Do not fall for every acronym. And remember that making things clearer for machines usually makes them clearer for people too. The Page 2 podcast is brought to you by Moving Traffic Media, the digital marketing agency Joe and I founded, specializing in SEO, answer engine optimization, and performance media. Learn more at movingtrafficmedia.com. Now, let's get into it. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Page 2 podcast. I'm your host, John Clark, and I'm joined as always by my partner at Moving Traffic Media, Joe DeVita.
Hello.
Today, we're excited to welcome Alex Moss, Principal SEO at Yoast and co-founder of FireCask. Alex has been working at the intersection of SEO, WordPress, structured data, product development, all of those things for more than 2 decades, and we're excited to dig into all of that today. Alex, welcome to the Page 2 podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Alex,
absolutely.
Looking at your resume, one might assume you are a serial entrepreneur. Would you say that's true?
I guess on paper, you can call me that. I wouldn't really describe myself as an entrepreneur. I'm not put that. I hope I've not put that in the LinkedIn, the bylines when you categorize yourself or something. I don't know. Maybe I would describe myself as I'm an ideas person and I've got lots of ideas, but I also internally, me and my wife, who business partners over the years, we agree we call myself 10% because 10% of my ideas are good, but I need to get out the other 90% of those terrible ideas to get to the 10 somehow. So, what you're seeing is much less than 10% of what's in my brain. So
as any good entrepreneur, right? You have to try things until you figure out, what's that right one.
I guess so. Or shiny object over there, and then you just go to that. It's a blessing and a curse.
You've been working with your wife for over a decade now. The agency you run has been successful. I mean, just to be still in business after almost a dozen years, you have been successful doing that. So congratulations. It's a pretty huge accomplishment to be able to keep a business going for that long.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it has its ups and downs with any business, and not everything's as glittery as it seems also on the surface sometimes. But like anyone, you've got to go through the ups and downs to get the experience. But it's been good. And it's been interesting being with your wife as well as a business partner. I don't know, it's definitely been better. Otherwise we wouldn't be working together still today. But yeah, I feel like we've seen a lot of people who get screwed over with disagreements and disputes. And we feel like, well, you can't really shoot yourself in the foot, Otherwise you sink in your own ship. You're in it together. And we're kind of self-aware. Like I was saying about my 10% before, I'm also self-aware of my role in a company and Anna's role in a company, and not to step on each other's toes, which is good because she's very creative and content-led and I'm very technical. So that's how we kind of started. They were, complementary skills that can go together. Also, not just the way you output your work, but also the way you deal with people. Like there's definitely been pitches when I've been inside a pitch And within 2 minutes, I'm sending a Slack message to Anna going, yeah, this is a U pitch. You need to get in here right now. Because if we do, I might not win this, And it's very true. It's good. But again, complementary skills.
I think that's something Joe and I sort of figured out about ourselves as well over the years. I think we maybe had a loose sense of it when we started the agency, but I think as we've gotten into all these different situations as you do as a business owner, we've really found those areas where each of us sort of complements the other, which sounds like a similar working relationship to you and your wife. I wanted to dig right into Yoast. I think about all the years that I've spent sort of dabbling in websites and getting client questions around, plugins and how do I optimize this? What do I do with that? And Yoast, I think, has always been at the very top of my list in terms of recommendations of install this and you can manage most things SEO related. I'm curious around like the defaults that you guys decide to sort of build into the plugin. Oftentimes there must be some sort of like decision tree around, yes, we should make this on by default or we should leave this off by default. And of course, you guys have so many users that any of those decisions you make definitely makes noise. And so I'm curious just to step outside of the technical piece for a minute, maybe like just as you guys debate these things internally, like what's the thought process that you go through to sort of decide, okay, we're going to leave this one on and maybe we're going to turn this one off?
I would think maybe at the beginning, if you think about maybe population, the site's already kind of populated already with certain information. So let's use schema as an example. If you want to output organization schema, you have a little bit of onboarding just to, clarify what is your business name. So there are inputs that you populate and then that turns on by default, right? And that's on because it shows no harm if it's there or not to the code, the output, the performance of the site, but still helps for the web, still helps for SEO. So it does that. Things like titles, outputting meta titles and meta descriptions, that was there before Yoast was installed. It's just that Yoast helps edit and optimize those things. So it inherits variables and templates and stuff like that, which you can use inside the settings and change them. It just gives the best practice that have been preached by search engines. Let's just say search engines because we're going back 20 years. Or Google. Google have been telling us to do certain things and then that's what we've done. And generally, we've just followed those orders, if you want to say it, or direction, as have the smaller search engines like your Yahoos and your Bings over the years. That's kind of how it's been done. But even then, we take XML sitemaps. It's not actually on by default because it's something that does not harm performance, but it definitely contributes towards resource. And therefore, you want to only put on the bare minimum of things that if it wasn't there, that would be a detriment to the site. And whilst an XML sitemap definitely does help the site, not having it doesn't make it a detriment, if you know what I mean. It wasn't there beforehand, so it doesn't have to be there now. And that comes alongside time as well. Just turning something on may have connotations, not just on the web, but on the customers as well. I won't mention who, but there is another plugin out there who did do an opt-out instead of an opt-in. And whilst, in my opinion, internally, I would have loved to have been in a scenario where everything, put that on and then they can opt out. That's fine. But look, it isn't like that when it comes to scaling your millions of sites, and you need to be a bit more cautious. Again, just not turning something on. I know that even Shopify did it as well. I don't know if you noticed that they turned on llms.txt and then they turned it off and then they turned it on again. Like that, to me, don't know if I was internal, I'd be hiding in a corner when those meetings were happening. Like, what's going on? But I get their intention. I get the intention was good. It wasn't like, let's try and do something to benefit us. It was to benefit the web. And I think that's how Yoast kind of has that attitude as well. Like, what's benefiting the web and does it need to be there? If it isn't imperative to be there, then don't default to that thing. And if it's in core, maybe adhere to the rules of WordPress core, then what search engines are telling us, vice versa. And then everything else is like optional, cosmetic.
You've been working with Yoast for about 3 years now. I'm curious if over the years in any of those like ideation sessions, you guys thought of a feature and decided this doesn't make sense for Yoast. It could lead to bad behavior. We want to make sure that's not something that can be easily automated. Though maybe important for SEO, we don't want to we don't want to put automation into this. It could be bad for SEOs in general.
Yeah, schema might be one good example. And I know that's not a complaint, but it's definitely feedback that some people have given us is schema's not intuitive enough to scale to do exactly what I want to do in Yoast. And whilst there are other products out there that are more intuitive. Now, when I hear intuitive, I I actually understand as easier. Right now, we've not put in place so any old website owner without any knowledge of schema can just add any item type and have any variable. That's not what we want to do. In fact, we do want to deter that. And that's why we decided not to put in a back-end schema generator type, right? Because anyone can create anything. It has to abide by the rules of the 985 item types. And even then, you don't need to adhere to every single one of them, as we fully well know. So that's a good example of one thing, because then people will take that, scale it, abuse it, manipulate it, and that causes problems. And then even though we're not the direct we're not the cause of it. We're a consequence of. We're the reason for the cause that it's happening. It's kind of like forest fires. You don't start looking at the match producers and saying that was your fault. Do you know what I mean? It was, a human did that. A human abused and manipulated the match to cause fire, not the match.
I like the example of the schema, because there's so many plugins out there, right? If Yoast doesn't do something that a site owner wants to do, then they can probably go find a plugin out there to do whatever that thing is. And then all of a sudden you have, all these plugins. I think we think a lot like you in the sense that, plugins shouldn't always be the default. If you're trying to do something. Like, there's a lot of times where it's better to just build it in the code itself. And I'm curious, like, as a plugin developer, like, how do you, like, if you're working on a site, like, how do you think about, I should get a plugin to do this because it's easier or maybe faster, or it really makes more sense for me to build this into the code natively and not rely on all the excess code that a plugin is going to inject into a site? Is there like a thought tree to that, or is it, maybe I'm making it too complicated?
No, it's just a tech debt formula. I should add, by the way, that we didn't make it not possible for someone to do schema, by the way. You can. We've got the schema API, right? But again, it's a deterrent to make it's not as easy. Us three, we may understand our way through a schema API and do what we're doing, but I like to think that, like you say, we've got the same ethics in mind. So if you're going to make the effort to manipulate it, then maybe you should be manipulating it, but at least we've made it harder for you by having to get a developer to understand how to work. Like, then there's that, and then there's questions. So it creates a little hurdle, but yeah, you can do what you want, just not in the back end. Yeah. When it comes to, what was your last question? Sorry, I went back to it, started talking about matches, didn't I?
Just around the choice of whether to install a plugin to execute something versus build natively. Yeah.
It depends on the tech debt, I think. Yeah, there will be something that you want very specific to you that maybe you do want to not hard code, but make as a child plugin inside a theme that's specific to you. Or maybe there is a plugin out there that's good enough for you to either fork or just use as you wish. And maybe out there, it's WordPress, right? At least as this example, it's a big open source community. You can ask if there's something missing from the plugin. Ask, and you never know. The developers might go, we never thought that was a really good idea, and then we'll put it into the next sprint or something, or it just gets added. Or there might be a valid reason, like, for example, using the schema thing, we've had requests from people making it, and we've provided the reason that I've given you now as to that was an active decision not to do that thing, and this is why. Then at least you'll have clarity, and maybe it'll be like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Maybe I shouldn't do that thing. But things are getting easier now. You've got, LLMs, you can vibe code stuff. I've vibe coded very, very simple things. And it's usually the simple stuff you want in your own little way. And it's usually the bigger thing that there's always something out there that you can fork or extend.
Yeah. Good.
I want to jump into LLMs, but I feel like I have more just Yoast questions. I'm curious, are there features you find people aren't using correctly, or like, is there a feature a lot of people have trouble with, don't know how to use, using it incorrectly? Do you see that?
Not so much that. I think it's not neglect, but I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll just activate Yoast, I'll do my onboarding, and then I'm gone. And then everything else will kind of serve itself as I scale, and whilst that's true to some things, it's not all. Like title tag templating. Yes, of course, you can leave that alone once you've got the settings right. Unless you want to change it in the future, you can change it in the future, or you want to do it by a CPT, or, get granular in the taxonomies. But I don't know. I would say maybe it is neglect, or maybe the right term now is looping, because that's the thing of loops now, isn't it? So things that you would go back to aren't really done. And we try to do things in there, like we've got the workouts, but it's kind of embedded, and you've got the business owner isn't always interested in understanding which which part of the site should be cornerstone content. They don't care. All they care about is that they want to sell something and that they may not want to concentrate. So there's this gap between being the website owner, making the effort, and then delegating that to a consultant. And that's the gap that sometimes is hard. And you can't just do that within the product as well. You can try and urge people, hey, did you know that you can use this? But we've all looked at that and not even seen it dismiss. And then, as a user, sometimes you just never see that thing and it's a shame. But I think it's in all of us, right? And we probably do it as well because we're I like to think advanced technically. I don't need to read that. I already understand what's going on there. And then you just carry on about your day. And then maybe 3 months later, you're like, maybe I should have pressed next instead of X, Maybe I should have read those 5 tooltips on day one and I would have been a bit more enlightened.
You mentioned content and you also mentioned sort of like advanced versus maybe user, like a newbie to SEO and sort of maybe websites in general. I wanted to talk a little bit about Yoast's content analysis. Do you think, is that feature misunderstood? I think there's like jokes around like, hey, just get a green light and you're optimized. But I get the reason behind it. Like not everyone is an SEO. And so if you can sort of give these visual cues for folks that maybe aren't as advanced or doing, in-depth keyword research to apply to a title tag, like that makes sense to me. But I imagine there's a way to use it in an advanced way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like maybe is that feature just misunderstood?
Maybe a little bit. I'm not a writer, so I would probably need it a little bit as a guide. How's my language going? And when we think about I would say jokes over the years of it's got to do with keyword stuffing, get a minimum amount of words, get a minimum amount of keywords, and you put it in there. And that did kind of half work. Sorry, it was successful in the past and maybe it's not as much now, but you would be surprised at how if I can't write and whenever I write a blog post, someone would say to me, that was a great blog post. And not that I don't think it was great or anything. I hated doing it. And I don't really review mine afterwards. I just hope that I've done right. And then I wait for the editor and I don't really come back with many edits. So I'm kind of lucky in that sense, but people just want to write about their own business and they could probably talk all night about it at a dinner table. But when it comes to writing on your website, it's a totally different thing. And I don't know, people still need guidance around that. And I think it will become more important in the future because we've got content structure and format now that's getting more important as LLMs ingest things. And I don't know, I've said in other talks and stuff that whilst the HCU was there and it decimated some small publishers, it paved the way to have higher editorial standards. Like for all too long, the internet's been awash with mediocre content that we've all been reading and accepting as that's the content that's out there on the internet. But now that it's harder to monetize from eyes, that stuff, that incentive to write is going to go away, leaving only, hopefully, one day, just pure journalism and pure writing and writing that's an experience for the human as storytelling, but factually accurate and concise for an agent at the same time. That's going to be a hard measurement to have, but we're trying to find that medium because right now we don't want to split webs in terms of content for agents and humans. We don't want that. I don't think it's double the maintenance for us. It's double the maintenance for search engines as well to crawl 2 versions of a page. So I think the way in which stuff is written is going to be important because I don't think that even I will write now in a way that I'm like, well, how's an LLM going to ingest this sentence or this paragraph, or how is it going to intake in tokens? And if I'm not thinking about that as a technical to be fair, sometimes I do think like that as I'm writing because that's the SEO in me, but normal people aren't SEO. Not everyone's an SEO, right? They don't think like that as they're writing, and therefore, these things are still going to be valid in the future. Stay on topic.
Might be reading between the lines, but was that a reference to like markup versus like HTML in terms of 2 separate versions of a page? Or
yeah, which is kind of what's happening-ish, despite mixed signals from teams within Google, which I get. It's a big company. You don't always speak to each other, but you've got the search team saying don't create a second version of any page with a different URL. But my answer would be content negotiation is a solution, or rel alternative is a solution. There's ways around these. They're small problems, and the bigger problem is ingestion by LLMs itself. I use on one slide, I just did an example of like an H2 and it had a class and an ID and it said about us. That's it. And that would take 12 to 15 tokens to ingest. Markdown would take 3. And there's no denying the maths behind that, right? It's over an 80% reduction. Why would you not? It's like us now saying when mobile optimization came out and mobile first web, and it's like an SEO's attitude going, nah, they can zoom in on the thing. That will give them the desktop version, they can zoom in. And whilst yes, they can technically zoom in, their experience of the page won't be as good as the mobile optimized version. It's that, but for agents, like an agent doesn't necessarily need to see visual. If anything, from what Andrej Karpathy is saying, like it's great to ingest content with markdown, but it's great to output content to the human in markup, because that's how we like visuals. That's how we perceive it as a species. Agents are a different species, if you want to categorize them like that, and they ingest information in a different way. And we're thinking that they like ingesting the same way we do, but they don't.
Well, the other thing is LLMs are more specific. Like they're going to read the text or ingest the text to understand the meaning. Whereas a user visually, right, I can scan a page and maybe through visuals or arrows or whatever, I can get a loose idea of what the page is saying. I also found it really interesting, and Google did this a while ago on Google Search Central, basically their developer blog. They have an option to view the markdown, and that's been there for a long time. So, it's Google saying one thing, sort of doing the other, and it's hard to read between those lines a little bit. But I think the differences between the tokens is, I think, really where this will start to get pushed, because we're seeing it with page speed and all these other things. Like they're trying to make the web more efficient. So you could see in the future a version where markdown is the preferred option.
Yes, for input for an agent. I guess it's I guess it would be token optimization is the best way of calling it, or token economic optimization. I don't know. I've used token optimization as a term. It's the only way that I can describe what we would do, other than now our role is to help with that. Just such like CWV is speed. Our job was to help make that page load faster. We're just trying to make that information load faster. It's the same thing. It's just not technical. So to a technical SEO, we're having to deal with words as well as the way it's output. So there's this mix of tech and content together, where SEOs are probably going to have to work closer with the content teams than they originally were before the last couple of years, which is going to be interesting as well, because you know how tech SEOs like to mix with other teams, right?
I want to take that comment you made answering an earlier question about we don't want to have 2 separate versions of a website, one markdown language for an LLM and one for customers and our prospects. I called you a serial entrepreneur. You said you don't consider yourself an entrepreneur, but when I look at your resume, that's what I see. And when I hear the talks that you've done, I kind of see you as a futurist. And I don't know that you consider yourself a futurist either, but if I could ask you to just think about the future for a second here, can you see this path where we don't need 2 versions because our prospects and our customers don't even need a website? Can you see this transition over 5-10 years where you're really just building a website for an LLM or for some feature that doesn't exist yet, where people don't go to a website to read?
Well, that last part's the important part, because then one can discuss whether websites are dead. And actually, if you want to take it from I like to, as you see, I like to compare things to things that maybe the internet's going to turn into a Kindle, and it's all just an aggregate bunch of information that gives you out. If anything, maybe we both go onto a website, let's say Nike.com, right? All 3 of us want a pair of trainers, but the website you see is different from the website I see, which is different from the website you see. Exactly the same content, exactly the same products, but maybe they're ordered in a different way for personalization, and maybe I just react more because an LLM knows. Maybe I just react more to blue and you react more to green and you react more to red. So all of a sudden you've got a red website, you've got a green, I've got a blue. And that maybe we have our own personalized website skins. And then the next version of that is, well, how does that get input, which is feeds output, which is where markdown would work here, because you don't need HTML at that point. HTML is only delivery between the agent and you, the end user. So the website and the agent does not need that necessarily. If it doesn't want to, maybe it wants neural help, visual help from human version, but maybe websites are dead. Maybe everything's going to be a bunch of feeds and aggregates. And the signs are there, really. I mean, you've got llms.txt, which wasn't really respected as much as I think it should be. It's a proposal for a web standard. Web standards, if we go back to schema.org, that was just Avi Guha and another 2 people. So he was in Google, there was a person in Yahoo, there was a person in Bing. They got together, decided on what should work between the 3 of them, and then that was it. That was it. Consensus. Great. There's no consensus right now. You've got ACP from OpenAI, you've got UCP from Google. They're competing with the standards. And then you've got, actually, to be fair, OpenAI have kind of slowed down on the web standards. Meanwhile, Google's geared up the standards, and in the last few weeks alone has released OKF, Knowledge Catalog, ARD, and a 4th one that I keep on forgetting. I'm sorry, Google, but 3 is good enough for a month, right? And they all have to do with aggregating information and outputting it in Markdown. After a week, and that was a week after search told us not to create Markdown versions of pages. And I'm now listening more. Not that I don't listen to search, because they're in a team and they've got their own things to do and their own thoughts, and maybe it is a bit isolated inside there. But I'm listening way more to the engineers right now, because they're the ones who are building the things that we're going to have to optimize for. And maybe that's future. I don't know. I'm seeing it as now, but like Google I/O was a good example. And Una was the one who was presenting and mentioned llms.txt. And I tweeted her and she replied, and she said both can be true. John can say that LLMs is not important for search, generative search. However, Una at the same time can say it is important for engineering. But then I'm like, well, okay, we'll forget John for a second. Let's go with Una's side. What's it important to you for? Because the answer is discoverability, and us SEOs are in charge of discoverability wherever that may be. And if it's not in generative search within Google, it may be useful somewhere else. So aren't we just here to have insurance and just hedge our bets? The problem is that there's so many bets to hedge onto that it's a bit overbearing. Like you were saying, what do you do if you want to create your own thing, a plugin? Like now we just use the word standard instead of plugin. What standard do we all use now? Which is going to be the one that wins? Can we assume it's going to be Google, and therefore UCP and OKF are going to win this race that no one seems to be in? There's no consensus again. OpenAI isn't talking to Google and isn't talking to Anthropic, and maybe they should be a little bit more, because I know that Fabrice and John shake hands with each other at events, but I don't think there's a search person inside OpenAI or in Anthropic that is thinking about these things, because it's not important to them. They've got way bigger fish to fry. We're just a function. We're just a little function inside an LLM that we've coined and thought that it permeated everything, but really it didn't, did it?
Well, I think some of the recent updates to Lighthouse, I believe, also includes an option. There's like an agentic section now, and LLMs is one of those things. Never really understood the debate around llms.txt anyway, because it's like you said, we've seen so many examples of Google saying one thing, but actually the reality is the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on, like, if you were building a site today, like, would you use an llms.txt file? And maybe more specifically, like, how do you think about that file? Is it simply a list of URLs, or do you put structure to it and maybe some instructions around what's important, what's not? You know, if Yoast has an option to include an llms.txt file, for example, like, what do you decide to like put in that by default?
I'll do another comparison. You're looking for a new house. First, this is your first viewing. llms.txt is your first viewing. You get to gauge what the house is like. Does it have the right light in that room? Is it for me? And am I going to see it again? The second visit, which is essentially the website more research, or LLMs-full, if you really want to go technical, is your second visit. What's the roof made out of? Was there a problem? Has there been any water damage? Has there been any leaks? All of those things that you don't really look at in the first one, because the first one you just need to know the bare minimum. How many rooms? How big are they? Does it have a garden? Those normal things. But then you start asking more questions, the follow-up. So to me, llms.txt is your first viewing, an open house, as you will, just to understand what the site's about. And that can be contrasted against agents.md, which is another markdown file, which is also specific to an agent, but not tells you what the site's about, but more so what you can do on the site and what the capabilities of the site are from an agentic point of view. So again, it's just all giving more context and therefore more accuracy, which again is part of an SEO's job. So it's like insurance. And last week I was talking at Search and stuff, and I compared llms.txt again to insurance, but we've had a heat wave in Europe. It's like the biggest it's been in forever, I think, in certain amounts of time. And people started buying air conditioners, even though knowing everyone that in a week, everything will be back to normal. But right now, I need that air conditioner. So people will go out. They'll pay more for it, but that's bye-bye. They'll get the air conditioner. They'll use it. They'll have a great 2 days. And now you've just got an air conditioner sat in the corner of the room, which you forget about. But you know that when the heat wave happens again, you've now got one in the house and you've got it there. And should you need it, it's there. That's llms.txt. You buy it, you put it in the corner of a room, you update it when it gets a bit old-fashioned or it doesn't work as well, and you leave it there until the environment around you requires that you need it. And if it's not there, it's only taking up a bit of space. It's not a problem. You know, if you're in a really big, let's say it's a small air conditioning unit in a mansion, you're not even going to notice it's in the corner. You know,
it's a pretty low effort optimization, right, to develop that file. But moving to agentic commerce is a huge, from what I can tell now, it's a massive undertaking. And I want to maybe shift us into that because I know that you are really bullish on it, and maybe you see the future coming quicker than John and I do. I'm just curious, like, what are the things that you're going to see over the next 3, 6, 9 months where it really leads you to believe this is happening quickly, or this is not happening as quickly as I thought it would?
Yeah, I'm bullish on it, but it's not going to happen fast, unfortunately. So 6-9 months, my answer in short, not a lot. Like, not a lot will happen to it, unfortunately. And again, I can compare it to the beginning of the e-com boom. You know, at the beginning of the e-com boom, it didn't just go like that one day. There was a slow uptick. People needed to trust the technology and the sources as well. Only in the last few years has my parents trusted Amazon with their credit card, right? It's like you're dealing but they're the normal person, the person who doesn't understand what we do day in, day out, and have more trust to delegate some of that stuff. But also, I don't know, I feel like OpenAI missed the trick with the use case by choosing Walmart. And although Walmart's great, it's a huge example. Like, I mean, answer this now, honestly. Like, are you going to buy your bananas on your next shop through ChatGPT chat session? No, you're not. You might buy a pair of trainers or a new jacket, though. Maybe they chose the wrong vertical. Maybe they should have chosen a clothing manufacturer or, like, you know, a big retailer where decisions are a little higher than $1 for a banana, but a little lower than $1,000 for a new laptop, for example. But I don't know, maybe I'd buy a laptop through an LLM today. What I wouldn't do is buy a house, buy a car, you know, things that require decision making with your other half or a family member, or can change, you know, a huge investment. Those kind of things will need a bit more research. But I don't mind delegating my research, especially with Google, if they've got my personal intelligence. So what? They like a certain type, I like a certain type of trainer, so only serve me that certain type of trainer, unless you think that someone like me may like this other trainer. Like, they'll be able to do those things. I just think it'll just take a little bit longer. And it's only in the US and only a selected partner. You basically have to get your shoe in the door. You have to speak to about 20 people in Google just to be on UCP in Europe. And that's a bit of a shame, especially when you've got write-ups. Like in SEJ, they wrote about the Walmart thing saying, oh, well, it was a failure. Was it a failure, or did you just give it 90 days in the US for supermarket goods, groceries? Like, it's not the data set we need. We need something a bit meatier to chew on, really. And until that happens, I don't know.
90 days for something that new is not nearly long enough for adoption. I mean, it seems to end the test before it even gets started.
Which is a shame, right? Because I'm not, in the futurist sense, I do see there'll be a day where you're using any smart device and it is pretty much like the film Her, and you'll be walking with your smart glasses and you'll see like someone eating a banana and you'll be like, oh, get me some bananas. That's it. Like that, I get that that's the end result, probably. But for now, I just don't see people talking to themselves in the street, ordering stuff online, like, or just having a chat about what they may do this weekend and converting that to booking a holiday in 3 days. I just don't, not yet. We're not used to it. The tech's ready, but we're just not ready.
The tech, the protocols are there for an e-commerce company to implement, but the consumer behavior is not there, right? There's two things that need to happen along the same path. Like, consumers need to get comfortable with it, but there also needs to be this threshold of e-commerce companies that have accepted that this is a new form of commerce and invested in all that infrastructure.
Yeah, and with honest and genuine intentions, not like, oh, well, we'll just give you this one make in this one state. Like, that's where we'll do this little granular bit of detail. Like, you're just not, the culture's different. You and I alone will maybe shop differently because I'm European and you're American. Like, there's just these little things that we have that make us make decisions, not for good or bad. It's just, we're in a different place. And I don't know. I know that America's used as a good testing ground because there's a large set of people with quite similar-ish culture-ish, while still having a good demographic. But I don't know. I feel like people should be more from everyone going how experimental they're being with tools and making stuff. Like, I find this is the really conservative is the actual test in the real world. I don't know, maybe people are scared that attribution won't be there or things might go awry. Like, we know that schema may not be updated on the fly. If there's a sale with a big shop who's only got 1,000 pairs of this new shoe and everyone's on, how is it going to deal with that in an LLM? That, I think maybe it's surge, purchase surging. And when you're inside a website, Amazon Prime Day, we all know that it gets crazy on those. It must get crazy on those. Do not envy the engineers in that company on those 2 days. But at least it's contained within their own systems and they have true control over everything and not reliant on something that maybe hasn't been built 100% yet or too, so it's that concrete and maybe it's too risky. Who knows?
You mentioned the idea of, someone walking down the street, seeing a banana and saying, hey, I don't know, hey, her, like, order me that set of bananas. In that scenario, there still needs to be, unless you define the shop, right? There needs to be some sort of discovery by the LLM. It needs to be able to select that merchant and then go through the process of purchasing that item. You've written a little bit about, optimizing away maybe from clicks and more toward that idea of selection. And I was curious, in your mind, like, what does it mean to be selected by an AI agent? Like, how do you get to that point? Is it technical? Is it content? Is it a mix of all those things? How are you sort of putting your mind around that?
A mix of all of those things. Maybe I was alluding to it before, saying that it's now getting towards more how content's output and formatted and structured. Just being concise. If you really want to be stringent about it, you have to think every single sentence that you write, is that something that an LLM could quote? And if the answer is no, rethink that sentence. And another comparison I use, and we've all done this, we've all been on one of those websites. It's usually a tech firm. And you go on About Us and you read 3 sentences and I still don't know what you do. What do you do? Stop saying, and it's for the human a little bit, the story. I'm not into stories because I feel like as a marketer over the years, I'm very cynical about, I don't fall for any of that stuff. So just give me what I want. Maybe that's the attitude that everyone should be giving when they're outputting. Give me what I want. Agents don't care. They don't have emotions. They don't care about a story. They know that you may care about the story and to synthesize a story into the answer for you, but not for it. It cares nothing about, the fact that I like sunsets and walking. It doesn't care. It just knows that maybe I might like some walking shoes. Maybe there's a sell on all of that. That's all it thinks about. Is it just needs to be concise and accurate, valid, and that's kind of the moat of entities, relationships, format, and perception, which is I guess offsite.
We've had a lot of good conversations around this idea of like semantic triples, which I think is exactly what you're talking about. Like, what is the simplest sentence for a machine to sort of understand? And we've been having conversations with clients around, you need to decide what your brand semantic triples are, and then how do we get those integrated into everything you're creating? But one of the things we hadn't been doing was taking an existing page or maybe a new blog post that was about to be published and running that through some sort of analyzer to see how those sentences are being structured. And so you were talking about vibe coding earlier. We just built a tool that sort of does that. And it's really fascinating to look at because, like you said, there's these About Us pages that have all this fluff and industry jargon, but never explicitly says what they do. And now, anyone can build something that sort of puts a visual around how difficult it is for a human, let alone an LLM, to really understand what it is they're doing. And so I believe in that concept a lot, making things as simple as possible for both humans and machines at this point.
It is weird, but people do it. People I don't know, I feel like I don't like being directed. I hate it when I go into a clothing store and someone asks if I would like some help trying clothes on.
It's like,
I've done it before. You don't need to help me. I've been able, I learned this when I was a kid. Or I don't know, it's just these things, sometimes you just want to be left alone. And if I want to have help, I will seek for help. So I guess it's another way of looking at it like that. But again, handing that information over, I guess if you use the shop example again, I might be inclined, if that person knew me, who came up to me and went, "Hi, Alex, I know which t-shirts you want," like a personal shopper. So that's the context that person, well, the agent here in that instance, would have, knowing that I would go, maybe I do need help straight away now that I know exactly what my preferences are, and you don't need to show me something that's just a bit more expensive but may not suit me because that's, an incentive for commission. Maybe if it was just a bit more honest and you knew maybe it wouldn't fit right on me because I'm not actually a 34 waist, I'm a 32 or whatever that is, just to get a sale, it's going to be a bit more coherent and a bit less salesy, weirdly enough, from a storyline. It's like any personal shopping. I know women do it more, when they try on a dress and there'll be someone else who'll be like, "That looks amazing, that looks fantastic," and that person's usually the salesperson, like, or try this one on, this one's double the price, try that on. It's one of those things, but you just kind of want that friend in the corner to go, "The cheaper one was better, that actually looked better on you." And I think that's maybe what the LLM is going to do, is give you a bit of more honest feedback away from the sales of the website itself that is trying to sell to you, because that's its job, or should be its job.
I was sort of setting up my next question with your thoughts around this, and then Joe, I'll let you go. I was curious. So we talked a little bit about llms.txt. I think there's a role somewhere, some sort of standard that'll eventually come out. And then you have this idea of selection, which is all around, making content as simple as possible in a smart way. How do you think about like AI information pages in that ecosystem? So I know there's some folks who've been doing tests around publishing AI information pages. It's basically, markdown text, but is designed to sort of funnel up everything that an LLM should know. Or maybe you found some sort of inconsistency across the web and you can sort of right size that on the brand domain. Do you see a place for that type of, explicit content on the web as well? Or how do you think about that?
Yes, I think you do need things like that. And we worked on Yoast aggregation feature. So I'll start with aggregation. I think is the key here, and getting that information together and making it be the source of truth. So we built the Yoast aggregation feature with RV Guha, who made Schema. He's in Microsoft at the moment, and he's got NL Web. And NL Web's like a wrapper where you can turn your website into an actual conversation, so you can ask questions directly with it. So it does lots of cool stuff and it reads lots of cool things. But in that, the work that we did with RV was we actually created one endpoint, and it showed you every entity, every relationship deduped in one call, right? For a whole site. Didn't matter how big it was. Super cached, super fast, blah, blah, blah. That was great. That was really good. And it does work really well. But again, it's kind of like a proposal. There's no consensus. It's not been adopted by any platforms, just like LLMs. Dixon Jones from Inlinks, he's built Entity Map. And he's been able to do kind of the same thing. Well, it's similar, but not. So he's kind of doing, again, relationships, meaning, and he's done some tests. He did it on one test. Did one test where he just added an entity map to one page and made 0 changes, and then over time tracked how it was seen. And it did go up in the visibility of LLMs because it was using it to add context and add truth back. And then you've got Andrea Volpini of WordLift, who did Sangue e Graffi, which is Italian for wine and graphs. He did a large research paper where he basically tried doing, I think it was Gamma he started with, and then he upped Gamma a bit. But as he was doing it, he did some knowledge graph injection for context. And the more he put in and the smaller the model went, the more accurate it was. And in a talk, I used a good example of, let's say John has been working for Sam for 20 years. John is like a son to Sam, but Paul, his real son, is estranged from him and hasn't spoken to him for 40 years. The question would be, who's legally entitled to Sam's shop, right? Now an LLM might deviate with the story of how, I forgot their names already, right? How the person number one is like...
Paul and John, I think it was.
Yeah, right. Paul and John. So one of them's like a son, but isn't. One of them is a son, but doesn't have the emotional connection. The frontier LLM would choose the like a son potentially to give the answer, whereas a smaller model with context would obviously understand the entities and the relationships between them a little bit more to provide the right answer. Mark Williams Cook did a similar one as well, where he wrote, I think he started with ChatGPT of, I want to wash my car. The car wash place is 200 meters away. What should I do? Walk there or drive? And ChatGPT said walk because it's not a long distance. Now, he then asked Google about it later after posting about it, and it said you need to drive there. And then I think he never found out whether, well, he said at some point it got a bit viral, and therefore he assumed that the LLMs learnt from the mistake and then closed the gap. So when he did eventually ask again, it gave the right answer. But he said, but that was there. It wasn't thinking the way that we kind of think with things like, should I walk to the car wash to wash my car? Or is someone who's like a son actually my son? And in another podcast, we were talking about, well, the best way to solve the son like a son thing is a will, right? But the will is technically the source of truth. So that would be the case of the website at this point to know what's the definite choice of what to do and what decision to make based on it. And again, that can be structured. I guess it could be put in structured data, what a will would be. If in your head, if you close your eyes, you can kind of make a will into an ontology. So it's kind of like that. It just needs to reference some source of truth. And I think it's going to be more important for us to do that and do it in the right way. It's just the right way is the hard part at the moment, because we don't know.
Right. The standard. I think you bring up a great point around the discoverability. Like the model needs to have a source of discoverability, and then it can close the gap or cite something that it doesn't know before. So we had Marshall Simmons on last season, or maybe it was 2 seasons ago, and this was when llms.txt was like a brand new shiny thing. Mm-hmm. And his point was, you have to make sure that the models can find it. So you need to link it from somewhere or submit it somewhere. I think it's probably the same for AI information pages or anything else that you're creating specifically for these models to find. So in the llms.txt example, I guess we'll just use that. Like, how would you think about ensuring that the models find it? Are they going to that URL regardless just to see if it exists? Or would you think about submitting it somewhere, I don't know, adding it to the robots.txt file as a source, right?
Yeah, I mean, it should be declared. I mean, if it's there, sometimes some models will just check it out just to see, like robots.txt isn't something you have to mention on the homepage, Right. So that was the goal, I think, that they wanted to do, was to make it a standard like robots.txt. But we do declare it in robots.txt in our feature. Some people also link to it from the footer, especially in developer docs. So I think Stripe do it in their developer docs. If you go to the footer, you can look at this as an llms.txt and get more information. But that's how it kind of started off, right? It started off for developer documentation. So an agent, instead of having a mission all around the whole developer docs, they would be able to see everything that they needed to on a summary form in llms.txt, but they had llms-full, which would literally be the entire documentation in one text file, which you can imagine is gold dust for an agent to deal with, because, I've got the whole file now. Great. I know everything. I don't need to navigate the file, navigate the web, anything anymore. I've just got this one file. And I think, Cloudflare have kind of done the same thing with the /crawl endpoint as well. They've got markdown as an endpoint. They've got content negotiation as a feature as well. So you don't need to deal with different URLs. There's a lot going in. And I think OKF is maybe OKF might have been the thing that LLM should have been, but wasn't thought of at the beginning. And that instead of just one central file, it needs to be an actual catalog, which is what it kind of is. And ARD is the same, If you can think of OKF as a leveled up version of llms.txt and ARD a leveled up version of agents.md, that's kind of where we're at. Again, aggregating information on capability and content.
This is the perfect spot for a quick break. Let me take a second on the folks who make this show possible. The Page 2 podcast is produced by Moving Traffic Media. That's our agency. Moving Traffic Media is a digital marketing agency that specializes in SEO, answer engine optimization, and performance media. In plain English, we help brands show up in traditional search and in AI answers when people ask ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, or Google about them. And we back that up with everything around it. from paid media and social to web development built for how AI agents actually browse. Joe DeVita and I founded Moving Traffic Media, and we're headquartered in White Plains, New York, with a second office in Miami. So if your brand isn't showing up in AI answers the way it should, that's what we do every day. You can find us at movingtrafficmedia.com. Okay, back to the show.
I'm going to start us in a whole new area. In kind of a hypothetical for our futurist guest here. If you were going to start a new business, you were starting to plan this new business. It hadn't quite yet launched yet, but you had an e-commerce company that you wanted to bring to market. You could build the perfect team, maybe not number of people, but the skill sets you knew you needed to get ready for this future with agentic commerce. What does that team look like?
Oof, that's a hard one. I mean, you've got to find, well, if you want to get a website, you have to find the right platform. And I still at the moment think that WordPress and Shopify are your only answers. This is e-com, right?
Yep.
Depending on what it is, Shopify wins. Depending on what it is, WordPress wins and WooCommerce wins. So let's go with physical. Shopify will probably win. It's better with logistics, weighting, all of that stuff. Whilst Woo has it, I mean, Shopify definitely built it that way. You'll definitely need a marketer who knows content, who understands your product, but isn't you, because that's your baby. You'll treat it differently. You'll be the one who wrote that about us paragraph, intro paragraph. Get someone who isn't going to write that. That's just, again, concise. Get a techie who understands, at least reads what's going on now, and maybe can make a call on what you should adopt, what you shouldn't. Maybe UCP is great to hear about, but we're not there because whatever I'm selling, maybe I'm a banana salesman. I don't need it for 5 years right now. Or maybe you're a shoe salesman and you maybe want to look into it now, whilst retail might be a winner, and then do things that don't have bigger tech debt for the dev. But the marketer, well, the content person, but you need an out. I don't know. You need a whole team, don't you? But now you might as well go, well, what agents can I build? What can they do? And they can do some stuff. Writing isn't yet one of them I would take over, but technical. I mean, this week I just created my own website for my personal site that I updated. It was in WordPress. I just wanted to experiment and see what Astro was like. So I vibe coded my new website in a couple of days between tasks, and it's fully operational and does everything it needs to. And it's not a CMS because it's just me. I'm a consultant. The last time I updated the content on my site was 18 months ago when I updated the site. That's all it's getting. And only then I only did it because advancements have happened, and maybe I need to mention stuff like agentic commerce, which 18 months ago didn't exist. It's mad, but I don't know. Experimentation's best, but vibing your way through as much as you can is definitely a good thing. I'd be saying if you're an e-com business now and you want to start up, take a week off and go on X, which I know that some people have feelings about X, but it has the best content in terms of videos of agentic stuff that I've been watching. Like YouTube, yeah, but I'm usually watching that YouTube video because I found it on X, and all the engineers are on there. It doesn't, just forget that it's political just for a second. Just forget it's a political platform. And if you ignore it, it's fine. Just keep on with the engineer. That's how I discovered all the engineers at Anthropic and OpenAI, and I follow them all and I read everything they've got to say. And they're not doing it in a blog post for us lot. They're not writing in Search Engine Journal and Search Engine Land. They're not doing. They're just building this stuff and they're tweeting about it, and then they go on with their day. And that's the interesting thing. Training more, because there's so much we don't know, and there's some that may be valid, and there's some stuff you were like, I didn't know you could do that. And I meet people who, Tom Winter, please have him on a future episode. He's great. He's great at automation. He will tell you stuff about automation that makes you go, my God, I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing. And the way he describes it all is it's not too complex. Like we all understand. That's what he's going to have. He's going to have a 100-person company with no employees kind of thing. That's where I think it should be. What can an agent do and what can a human do? And at the moment, humans can do quite a lot of stuff, but they'll be doing less. But it's mainly emotional based stuff that you're going to need humans for, the forward thinking rather than the backwards thinking of the techie, because soon you'll be able to manage your own site.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around how big that team is. Like, what are the tasks that need to only happen one time versus what is the person on the team who has a consistent work? You need them every week for something. Like the techie that you said you needed, this techie, that's someone who's like kind of got this engineering mind who can put these protocols together for you. Then there's your designer, your marketer, your content writer. I'm just trying to is it a 10-person team just to launch with agentic commerce? Or is it 5? No, what is it? What is it?
No, I guess there's no magic number. And also, if you think about Shopify, like they've put our UCP in core, right? So you don't need a dev for that, and it's just there. So again, that's why I said at the beginning, pick your platform well, because some of them are already in deep. And I don't know, I love WordPress, but unfortunately, they're not being at the helm of agentic commerce. They've not been in the discussions that Harley Finkelstein's been in with Shopify. Like he's in the room with Google and OpenAI before the stuff's being announced. So he's forward thinking. In my opinion, he's doing quite well in making, and they'll ensure that your question is answered now with me saying maybe consider Shopify because it's already done and you don't need to lift a finger. And the only thing you need to do is select a theme, and maybe you might have a dev for ad hoc stuff that's customized for you, with the plugin versus hard coding discussion we had before. And then the rest, I would say, would be marketers. That's the ongoing stuff, the ongoing stuff that you need content, but not too much of it. You need social, but not too much of it. Everything in moderation. And then yourself, because you're the best salesperson in your company, I guess. Maybe not. I feel like I am.
Yeah, definitely.
But no magic number. But there'll be more one-person companies coming out, I think. I think the more and more the years go on, the more and more you're not going to have to say, I need big, and I wonder what's that going to do to not the economy and so I don't know, maybe it's going to die. We're all going to die and have no jobs and stuff, and the robots will take over. But I don't know. At the moment, I feel like I know that jobs are being taken over by AI, but as long as you're using it correctly, then you have value to work with it and therefore stay employable. And it's what you're using it more for now, which to me is getting more done faster and leaner. Slides for talks, I used to spend so much longer. And now I look at the slides, I'm like, you spent how many hours and you came out with that? That was terrible. I'm not saying that Claude's remaking my slides. I'm still very much in the loop and approval, but it's making like visuals for me so much easier. I don't need to speak to a designer to burden them. They've got other stuff to do. And like now I'm just coming in and going, I've got these 3 slides. Here's some random data from a spreadsheet, make something nice out of it. And now we've got to have a meeting about it. No, now I just shove it into Claude and go, just make me some nice visuals out of this. And I don't know what it's going to bring. And when it does, I can chat about it with you. But I don't feel guilt on those tokens being used than I would pulling out a designer out of their day so that person can be doing better stuff as well. We just need to be working more efficiently. But I don't know, I feel like I'm a lot busier and time's moving way slower and faster at the same time. It's weird. I feel like llms.txt was like years and years ago when it was probably only 1 year ago. Mad.
That's a great way to put it. Like time is moving slower and faster. I've been feeling that too, but didn't quite know how to verbalize it. I think that's a good, I don't know, that is helpful for me to like think about it from that perspective. It does feel that way.
Yeah, it's like playing catch up though. The amount of times I wake up and I just open my X feed, I'm like, how much has happened in the last day? I don't even know. Like even today, I'm like, oh, Mythos is going to come out today again. So that means tomorrow is going to be a bunch of people giving examples of how they're trying to break it. It's crazy. It's crazy. But look, I like it. It gets exciting again. Not that it was boring before, but it was definitely plateauing on the knowledge we could get. And this is like leveling up. Are you really that passionate about your job? Then you'll be reading about all of this and wanting to watch these kind of podcasts and stuff like that. But if you're not doing any of those things, then maybe that's when I would worry, because this ain't going anywhere. And if you've got any aversion to any of these tools, if you haven't got a problem today, you're going to have a problem in 6-9 months. That's one thing I probably can predict, is that if you go, I would rather do what I've been that's like an SEO saying, you know what, this is all, I'm just going to 10 blue links forever. It's just it's not true anymore. We've got to face facts. It's not. That was the end. That's the end of it.
Well, speaking of the end, let's jump to a couple really quick rapid fires, and then we'll let you get on with your day. I think all this stuff sort of going around can be inundating. I'm really curious if there's, you could recommend one thing to sort of fully switch off and sort of step out of the grind of the day-to-day. How do you sort of balance work and relaxing?
Walking my dog, playing with my kid, who he's only 4.5, and he's got some tech, like he knows what YouTube is and stuff, but I try and make him as a father not do all the techie stuff that I'm doing, because there's time for that.
Yeah.
So I love doing that, playing with the kid, but that's a bit of a not a gimmick, but every parent says that it fulfills you. Mowing the lawn, like just getting, but anything that doesn't let me hold a phone, like, and I'll listen, and maybe I'll put my headphones in when I'm using my lawnmower or something. I'm listening to something, but that could be done before the internet existed. I had a Walkman, so those kind of things that relax me. Also watching non-complex TV. Like, I used to watch really bad reality TV, and I called it my amuse-bouche for the brain. After having so much brain activity over the day, and what we do is quite technical, sometimes I would find it very hard to sleep at night, especially if you're working into the night. Like, I need to watch some of The Office or Arrested Development or something, just anything that that will take a comedy that leaves you lighthearted but isn't complex and makes you thinking about work. But then I idiotically fall asleep to like podcasts about, from AI futurists saying how the world's going to be over in 2 months and what to do now. But I don't know. I feel like that's R&D. That's R&D, me listening to these podcasts, understanding a bit more what's going to happen.
What's your go-to Friday evening aperitivo?
I am a fan of spicy mix. I know it's really, is it British of me? It's like if you go to an Indian place and they've got this, it's called Balti mix. I just love it. It's just spicy. It's like a snack version of sriracha. You can have it with anything. Like, it's great. And also sriracha adds to everything, but a drink. I've been getting into an old fashioned, but replacing whiskey with rum. I don't know. I was in a bar and someone ordered it and I was like, that sounds delicious. And it was. So I've been that I would say a bit of old fashioned with rum and a bit of Balti mix.
Got to give that a try. What's one thing agency owners should learn to say no to sooner?
Can you just? Because it's never just, is it?
That's true.
Or can you... I heard what you just said about being organic, but so we are doing 10 blog posts a week and we are going to get 50 links a month. Like, did you not hear what I just said for the last 20 minutes about organic and being natural, and yet you're giving me a minimum requirement? That's not natural. Some weeks, someone doesn't talk about your brand. That's natural. You can't make it unnatural. And as soon as you do, it's manipulating. As soon as you manipulate, I don't know. I feel like we're a pre-Panda Penguin AI day where there'll be some weird apocalypse where there'll be, rules that you have not been adhering to, like scaling AI content is a great example of that. Again, that's the other thing you see on X is someone going, look at how well I'm doing. And you're like, I'm just going to bookmark that tweet and come back to it in 6 months because that site won't exist in 6 months. And maybe the profile won't exist in 6 months. And it's that kind of stuff. And is it snake oil? Is it not? Just don't fall for the snake oil. Don't jump into everything. Just because Reddit is a good factor maybe of consideration doesn't mean that you need to like pour in a team of 5 people to be on Reddit every single day. It shouldn't be part of your report on a Friday. What did we engage with LinkedIn? With LinkedIn, with Reddit? The answer is maybe nothing this week. It's again moderation. So don't go all in on everything. But again, don't spend too much time on all of the. Like I've been talking about all of these acronyms of different things and protocols you can use. Like read into them, choose which ones you want, and do one at a time.
I think that's perfect advice to end on. Alex, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for being so open and digging into some of these concepts with us. Let our listeners know where they can find you. And I know you've been speaking at a couple of conferences. Anything else coming up soon?
I am speaking at the Reykjavik Internet Marketing Festival, or conference, sorry, not festival. That's on the 17th of September in Reykjavik in Iceland. I will also be probably at Brighton SEO in the UK in October. And where else am I going? There's another one that I don't know about. It's gone from me. But there's a few. On my website, though, I usually tend to list what I'm going to, which is alex-moss.co.uk. And I'm on LinkedIn and X as well. I won't say my acronyms there as well. It's in the website. Everything's in the website.
We'll link to them in the show notes as well. Well, listen, Alex, thanks again for being for joining us on the Page 2 podcast. And for those listening, if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.